The Knights of Unity prezentują Knightcast, rycerze w branży gier.
Hello, this is Knightcast, episode without any number, because it's a bonus episode with a crew of board games here at Knights of Unity. Hello, guys.
Hello. Hi.
So, our guests are Sir Jester and Sir Gerard. I am Sir Rudey, as you already know. Okay, so first question is, I don't know, maybe a little warm-up. What games do you like?
Ooh, board games, you mean, or generally?
No, in general.
Generally, okay.
What games do you like play? What games do you like create? Or
as far as digital games are concerned, I like games that engage me a lot, like Sims or like MMOs, but I don't have time for that anymore. So I just love to remember how I like to play them. And as far as board games are concerned, I really like deck building games, cooperative games, games that have a lot of interactions with players and that are usually asymmetrical, so that every time we start we can swap some elements and have a completely new experience with the people that I play.
Cool. And you?
And for me, for the digital part of the question, Baldur's Gate, then nothing, then the rest of the games, and maybe Dead Cells and that kind of fast action-packed games.
Mm-hmm.
And for board games, area control games, for example, The Lord of the Ice Garden, or action programming, very good mechanics. For example, Metallum, very good Polish game, and deck building as well. So, for example, Tyrants of the Underdark, because it's a deck builder with area control.
Cool. All right. What's the story behind board games here at the Knights of Unity? Because as anyone already knows, our company creates games, but mostly digital. But that's not all of it.
Not anymore. So the story started probably much earlier, but the official kind of a beginning is March 2020. So a perfect timing, because that's when the pandemic hit. And long story short for now is that at some point one of the board members approached me. I was then working at the CEST Digital Edition as a programmer. We were fixing bugs and finishing the polishing the release. And he asked me if I were interested in taking somebody else's game, a board game, and developing it to a level in which we could publish it. And so I said, sure, no problem. And this was the Death Throes All-Stars. This is when I first had my hands on the entirety of the project, because I played it once or twice before that, when it was just a prototype that was supposed to go fully digital, but they needed to test some mechanics, and it was easier to make it first as a board game, physical components, because it was just quicker to iterate. And once I got it, we started working on the board game department here. And for the first couple of months I was basically alone, just cooperating with other departments like the graphics department and others. And then Gerard came to support the whole development, and then it kicked off, and we started really working on this game as a product, because for the first few months it was more like setting up the whole idea for a board game department, and also researching how this game can develop, also cooperating with the digital development group. So because Death Throes All-Stars is just a board game, and the Death Throes tournament is the digital counterpart to it, and they were being developed side by side. And once we had more people and we had more experience with that, we started diverging and finishing this as a fully fledged board game. And the development team for the digital version, focus on their own aspects. And
Yes, everything you said, because I jumped into the project later, so I have nothing to say.
Okay, so
how was your experience, coming in? Like, what did you expect and how it happened? That's what I'm interested in.
About me, it was something like I was a casual programmer. I was working for a big worldwide company. The other one, not the Knights of Unity, obviously, and I was making games like almost as much as my regular job, but it was just for fun. And I started to cooperate with Awakened Realms, a big company from board games company, and I was publishing my titles, working on them with them on other titles, other designers. So I decided to change something, because I was just working more, but during the day I was a programmer, and during the night I was a board game designer.
Superhero.
Yeah. So I decided to switch a company and to make what I love, so board games.
cool. All right, so we already know who you are, but Jester didn't tell us what your story in whole game dev thing, not only the board games part.
All right. It's I guess a little bit unusual story because as many of us, I started with some kind of a game interest in game designing in early age. At an early age. So, for example, when I was in primary school, I had some game prototypes that I was creating on the basis of the games that were popular then. I was reworking them, but they never, were used in any broader context than just me and maybe my friends. They were mostly just some designs that I used for fun, for kind of a fun outlet. And then there was like a little bit of nothing in that area because my background is English. I studied English and I teach English up until this day. I still work as an English teacher. And I was doing this and I was okay with this, but it was not something that would kind of give me this full satisfaction, right? It's a good job, it's a nice job, but I wanted to develop myself and there was no space for that in that aspect. And so at one of the lessons with one of my students, he told me that there's something like a game jam and that I could, like maybe meet some people there. And at that time I was like learning to program on my own from YouTube videos, from tutorials, from courses, all that kind of stuff. And I went to this game jam here in Wrocław, and then I met some people who later turned out to be people from the Knights of Unity, and that's how I kind of got my foot into this door. Later on, I was admitted as a junior programmer, and I was like working my way up there, working at the CEST digital edition all the time. Mm-hmm. And by the time the project finished and I was relegated to some other task, one of the board members called me and offered me this board gaming job, which also kind of coincided with the fact that like a 2 year prior to that, I started getting more and more into board game design also on my own in my spare time, like Gerard did. We actually met through these community.
Yes.
And so kind of it was like the time when this interest of mine could be switched into more professional track, and luckily so it happened that I was able to go that route.
And by the way, I started to design games when I was 6, I think. Mm-hmm. So
nice.
Quite a lot time ago. But my first game, I remember it. It's a game about rolling die and moving, mm-hmm. like 90% of child games. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I remember that. That part that everyone has to just roll and move was really annoying for me, so I decided to make my game different. And every player has had its own track for moving, and it has only six spaces, and that's it. So the game was terrible, but that's how it started.
It's a finished product. So.
Yeah, I think the all of the game creators' first game is a disaster, just a disaster.
And then the second game and the third game and the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
game.
I created like 50 or maybe more prototypes or concepts of games before I've even shown my prototype to a publisher to publish a game. So A Flick of Fate, my first published game, was like my 50th or maybe something more game I created.
Cool. So a lot of games.
Yeah.
All right. So what is the process of creating a board game? Is it something similar to create a digital game, or this something much different than this?
Well, there are similarities, of course, and there are a lot of differences, which is kind of an obvious answer. But digging deeper into that, for sure, there are aspects of board game design which seem to be much easier, because every time you want to iterate, every time you want to change something, you change some values on cards, you change some rules in your kind of a notebook where the rules are written, because there's no even a rule book at that point. And the game is different. And in a digital realm, if you want to change something, then suddenly you have to, throw half of the code that you've written to the bin and rewrite everything. So that's kind of the good aspect of it. But it's kind of tricky about that, because those changes don't come so easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you can change it easily doesn't mean that it happens quickly and without any effort, because the board game is very limited compared to a digital game in terms of how much it can do for you. So the rules must be much more streamlined. There can be no kind of back end processes that help player to push him along the way. Everything has to be clear, smooth, and polished. So a bulk of the work on a game design is finding those like rules that will perfectly balance each other out and will make the experience as fun as it can be, right? That's the kind of initial thing that I thought of.
And for me, designing a game is just designing a game. It's really similar, even for a digital game. But developing a game is something different. And because of that, you have to keep this part in mind when you design a game. So when you have to design a digital game, for example, you may use real-time mechanics and so on, massive multiplayer online games and so on. But for the board game, it does not work. So you just have to keep it in mind. But as the general idea of designing something, as creating from the scratch something, some mechanism, it's really similar for me. But the development is really different.
Okay, so are there maybe some tools that are helping you with the development process? Because I think that you're not printing all the cards or boards or anything. Maybe there are some tools that help you work, some digital way.
Yes and no. Sometimes you just have to cut some paper to draw something by yourself. It's normal, and I think it's the most creative part when you have to just play with physical components. But of course, we have some digital tools, like for example, TTS. It's a tabletop simulator. So it's a 3D physics engine for board games.
Okay.
So you have an easy way to make some cards, tokens, even miniatures and so on. And without even without coding, you can just make a game you can play online with some friends or test with a person from another country with no problem.
Yeah, like for example, this game. When I first started working on it, it was a physical prototype, right? Because for the necessity to show it to others, it was produced. But from this initial prototype, the version that was first printed was maybe like 6 months later. And it was, there were like 20, 30 iterations along the way. and they all were done completely virtually in the tabletop simulator. Because, as Gerard said, you can quickly change a whole deck of cards. If you did it with pen and paper or even a printer, it would take you a whole day to do that. And you can, change this deck like 3 times a day using a digital tool like that. And also, I could play it with friends online, and in the pandemic, that was a lifesaver because, we couldn't just meet face to face. So I could check if the ideas that I had in my head were viable or not. And through that, it kind of sped up the whole process. And only when we had like a more official occasion to meet and test these things out, it finally got its physical form, and we were able to see how it all works. And what I wanted to add to this is that those digital tools are great; they help a lot. But nothing beats a physical prototype, like it was mentioned before. Because, for example, the digital table is on your screen or in your VR headset, if you want, because Tabletop Simulator allows for that. But it's not in front of you. You don't touch it with your own hands. So the sizes of, for example, some boards, some tokens may fit for the digital realm, but they completely fail when you start touching them because they are too fiddly, too small, too big, or they don't fit the information you wanted to have on them once it's printed. So it's good to test mechanics and some ideas in the digital medium. But once you want to switch from developing a game to developing game as a product, physical copies are just a way to go.
Yeah, for example, we had a big problem with testing my expansion for the Flick of Fate because it's a flicking game.
Yeah.
So TTS has some utility, has some tool to flick objects around the table, but to test it like a real game, no. You have to be with your friends to flick, to hit with your finger, and that's the only way.
Yeah. Right. So I imagine that designing games, board games, is a lot of thinking about numbers. Is it or is it not?
Yes and no.
Of course.
Because you have to keep in mind some numbers only in maybe 2 cases. You have to keep thinking about numbers. If you want to publish your game, because of the production costs and so on, so it's not the game design itself, and you have to keep in mind your numbers when you are balancing your game. So if you have, for example, a heavy Euro game, economic strategy and so on, you want to do some game to be played on tournaments, something like this. Yes, numbers are important, but in all other cases, numbers are not as important as people think they are. For example, let's say Avalon, the great game, something like a popular mafia game. It's about guessing who's the bad guy, who is the traitor, and so on. So that's all about the experience, about talking with other players and so on. So you cannot just put some numbers and expect this to work. Like there are some Excels of the Avalon already published game with thousands of games, and people are trying to take out some statistics, and it appears to be not the best balanced game ever.
Okay.
But the game is just great because of that experience. So the experience is such more important than numbers, that numbers are, in my opinion, not something you are considering all the time.
Okay.
And on top of that, like numbers, unless you are a math geek, don't bring you so much joy, right?
Yes.
So playing a game where you have to count a lot of things, right, and have some kind of math skills involved, typically, of course, not always, but typically are less fun to play for a majority of people. So if you're able to hide those numbers in your development process, so for example, instead of a big number or like different kinds of points that you get along the way, and then you have to count them all, change them into some kind of tokens or something that kind of balances itself out during the game, right? So at the end, you just have to do some minor corrections. That kind of makes for much pleasurable experience. And so the math kind of on our part, on the designer developer part, is still there, right? But we want to kind of hide it as much as possible and kind of do it for the players in the final product.
And let's say we have some superhero game, for example. When I tell you that you have a card that you can hit your opponent for 3 points, and you have another card that you can hit your opponent for 5 points, it's just okay, some numbers. But if you have something like you can push your opponent through the wall, for example, it's something cinematic. So you are thinking about how great this is, and this is what stays in your mind after the game, and this is what we are trying to achieve.
Okay, so this is something more about imagination,
yes,
maybe, than counting numbers.
Yes,
exactly. I have a challenge for you. Like when you hear somebody after playing a computer game or a board game tell you like a couple of days later, like, oh, remember when I hit this guy for 13 plus points and then he subtracted 2 points of armor and then 11 points were left, like, then tell me and I'll pay you money for that, because like nobody thinks about their game experience this way, except for maybe like some people who are really into math, right? So that's kind of
and this is another difference between designing for board games and designing for a computer, for something digital, because computer can do math for you, and the players board game cannot. So if you have a board game, you have to keep your math pretty simple to players to maintain the game, and when you are trying to do something digital, you are fine with some numbers, even fractions or something like this.
Exactly.
Okay, so what's the future of the board games here at the Knights of Unity? Because Death Roads is already ready. And what's next?
So we have a lot of work with Death Roads All Stars to do because of the additional content. For example, for the core box, we have some more vehicles to play with some more weapons, more drivers, some special mechanisms. I don't want to spoil it for now, but we have a lot of additional work to make it even greater than it is. But it works, yes, obviously. I think that it is pretty clear for everyone that plans some projects that you cannot just have one project and this is it. So we already started working on some other projects from the Knights of Unity, but board games.
Exactly, and also, this project is our first board game project. So alongside the development of the game, we are putting a lot of effort into developing this as a standalone department that will be able to, take care of all the aspects of the game production, from the initial design to the final kind of a shipment to the backers, to the customers and players. And that's what we are doing right now, and we are still, in this process. Like, we've learned a lot. We've established a lot of useful contacts with third parties for the production, for the logistics, for other aspects of this. But we still have to work on a lot of these things, like just the two of us, or with some people who help us from the company, but they are not experienced in the board game realm. So we will be developing the board game department after this project is more or less kind of ready to be shipped. That will be our main focus, and of course the next project that we have in the works already.
Speaking of, I can give you a sneak peek maybe about our future projects.
Okay.
It will be something based on our digital games.
Yes.
So I cannot tell you a lot because it's too soon. But if you know our digital games, you can expect something in this direction.
And this reminded me also that we generally, as the Knights of Unity, want to work closely between the board game department and the rest of the company to create games that complement each other. So now we have the Death Road All Stars and Death Road Tournament. Then we will have the secret project, and then we will have two, and then we will have other projects that either the board game idea will give rise to a digital game, or the other way around. But we want to use the full capacity and the potential of the company to create those bridges between these two realms, because there are a lot of people who enjoy both types of games.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now this is, as you already said, only two of you working mostly on board games, but are you thinking about maybe recruit some more people to do this? Is it some near future plan, or is it maybe something far from this moment?
No, it's something a bit more complex, because when you have only two people, for example, Jester and me, and you did something wrong. For example, for your first game, your timelines are not perfect, and you did something wrong. You just wasted the work of two people, and it's pretty okay. But if you have a big professional department and so on, you just wasted the work of the whole department. So for now we are trying to do as much as possible only using our work. Then when we have something that we are sure about, that we can do it well and we can scale it up, yes, then we want to be bigger.
Exactly. We will be definitely at some point when we feel that we can stand on our own. We will need people to delegate some of the tasks to, and speed up the process, because a fully developed, fledged board game company can crank out board games in a matter of couple of months. It took us longer with Death Rows, but that's because we had to do all these things ourselves, rely on support rather than cooperation with other people. And with time, this will speed up. We'll have to probably find new people to optimize the processes, right?
Yeah, and there's more, because when you're a big company, you have to deliver more games.
Yeah.
You cannot just push one game for a year or two. You have to push more games.
Okay, so we are talking about the process and already know how, in general, the process of creating the board games looks like. Is it possible to create a game in maybe, I don't know, 2-3 days? Why I'm asking, because there are game jams around the world, and they are mostly for digital games. How about board games?
So,
if there only was a game that was created on a digital board game game jam event and was published, right?
Okay, so my first published game, The Flick of Faith, is the product of the board game jam. And it was created during 48 hours initially, but the further development took us 8 months or something like this. Okay. So the game was pretty close to what you know from your stores, from the published game, but something like arts on the cards. And production and logistics and so on, and some further rules changes and balance and more content, more powers and so on. It took us obviously more time, but it is possible to create a fun, good game in relatively small amount of time, but it has to be a small game, in my opinion. You can design or even develop a very great idea for a part of a bigger game, but you cannot really create a bigger game during 2 or maybe 3 days or even a week.
Okay, so just to have some vision about it, what is a big, great game that you cannot create in 2 days, and what is a small game?
So small game you can create in like 2 days is something that has maybe only cards, maybe some dice, something that is pretty out of the box solutions, and you are not as much innovative in bringing a new mechanisms to the realm. So, for example, you can mix existing ones. For example, area control and flicking is something pretty unique. There are some games that are trying to do this, but what Flick of Fate is something unique. But you cannot really test your mechanism if it's something really new. And something bigger you cannot create in just a few days is for example the Great Wall. So my another game from Kickstarter. It was a really big game plus a lot of expansions and so on. So the development and even design of this game took us. Okay, so Flick of Fate is already published for like 2 years, and the Great Wall was was first. So the Great Wall was in the production before in the development, designing before I created Flick of Fate with my co-designers.
Okay.
So this is something you just have to prepare a few years to deliver to people.
Okay.
And like a game that can be created quickly also may heavily rely on like player interactions. So all those like party social games, you just have to be slick and innovative about the rules that you introduce, right? Games that kind of like mafia style games, right? You can copy the base rule but introduce some interesting twists, and you already have a game that people will want to buy. And what you're left with is this kind of a process of testing it to see if there are no game-breaking elements, right? Whenever you create a bigger game where you have resources to manage, some armies or whatever management some numbers you have, each such element is another like moving part in this huge machine. So you have like a 20 cogs that have to move in unison, and if one of them is slightly off, the game will, break horribly. So that's why, like 2 or 3 years for such a game is a normal development time, because you just have to. You don't have this help of a computer that kind of spits out an error when your code is not correct. Of course, you can build like automated testers for board games. This happens, but it also takes time, right? And then if you then you kind of merge these two mediums, right? Because you have a digital tester, so you had to introduce some code and some logic behind this testing. So you're almost like programming the board game itself, but in a simplified form to test your physical board game if it doesn't crash at some point. And then if something crashes, then you have to rework it. Every time it's kind of like this Jenga tower. You move one piece, all starts to wobble, and you have to make sure that you kind of replace it with something equally good or better.
So you could compare the simplest board games to maybe, I don't know, roguelikes, something like that, with a lot of randomness, which comes from the players.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, let's talk something more about Death Road's All-Stars and the workflow behind it. What's the specific process of creating a game like this?
So we, in this project, decided to kind of have the roles. I mainly am responsible for the design, and Gerard is responsible for development. So I I come up with some ideas.
And I cut them off.
Exactly, and he kills them. And in the end, the final kind of a customer will benefit from that, because some of the ideas are way over the top, and some of the kind of a cuts are helping them to take shape that will fit into this game. And over the past, I don't know, months, weeks, this game was kind of taking shape, because we knew what we wanted to get. We wanted to get like this fast-paced, race-based fighting game, right? Because the race element is kind of a secondary to this kind of a interaction fighting game, negative interaction, randomness. All these kind of things play the biggest role, because they bring the most fun to players.
And cinematic experience. So a lot of scenes you saw in the past, for example, in Fast and Furious and something like this.
And we had a gameplay that worked, but didn't deliver the purest form of this fun, right? And the development process helped to kind of cut out the unnecessary parts. Like right now we play during a player's turn, we can play two actions: one from a card from a hand, the other one from the driver, which we might talk about later. And in the past there were like as many cards as you want, or just 3, or just 2, or just 1, and then everybody plays just one, and it supposedly goes quicker, but there were other problems with that. And so we had to test different ways to do this core kind of a flow of the game. And so somebody came up with an idea, we did some tests with different people, we gathered feedback, we tested it ourselves as well, and then we reworked it. And then we tested it again and reworked it, and so forward and so forth. And in the meantime, we were kind of finding other elements that could be improved. For example, on the board, on the vehicle board, you have this red track, which is the condition, so it's kind of like the health of the car. And in the original version, it was like 60 spaces long.
Whoa.
So again, digital realm, you don't see that this is a problem. But when you try to print it on this size, you would have like tiny spaces and a tiny token to move around, which my big fingers would not be able to track. So we decided to do it this way, that we have one track, but at the end you have this special field where there are tokens, and each time you get to the end of this track you remove one token. So effectively, because there are 3 tokens, you have 4 of these tracks, which translates to more or less between 40 and 36 points of damage that you can take, plus additional mechanics that kind of actually make it even bigger at some points. And it looks much slicker, it's much less math dense, as we talked before. And it works the same way we intended from the very beginning. So this is kind of it's not that we come to the office and like, okay, today we are solving this problem. No, it's like at some point somebody texts somebody, at night, like, hey, how about this one, right? And then the next day we try it, or like a random lucky occurrence kind of makes it possible to switch something, and like, oh wow, that's much better, right?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, this mechanism is where we blend digital realm with board game, because the health bars are something from the digital games. So this is it, basically.
Okay, so when was the time that graphic designers comes into the project, or maybe 3D graphic designers, because we have this kind of neat cars.
Yeah, this is a cool question, because it depends. If you want to know about the normal process, if there is something like this, or death roads, because
okay,
exactly.
So maybe
you tell us about the normal process.
Okay.
I'll tell about death roads.
Okay, so the normal process, you have rules on a white piece of paper. You have maybe some drawings, maybe some images from the internet, something like this, and it looks awful for the most prototypes. But it works. It's just you can play it. You can move the components. It's everything you need to test your game. But it looks awful. And if everything's fine, you know that the components wouldn't change too much. You can call your art designers, and you can pay them for the work, because you don't want to pay them too early, because if something for example, we have 5 cards, and we decided that we don't need the 5th card. So if you already paid for the 5th one, that's just your cost, and there's no profit for it. So you're waiting for the moment when you know what exactly art you need, and you are trying to develop that art. That's the normal process. So, for example, 3D artists and 2D artists are present from the beginning. From the beginning, are trying to do something like, for example, a box cover, catching the spirit of the game. But for the components, it's for the later part.
Okay.
But in the dev roads.
Yeah, and just one more thing, and typically after everything that Gerard said happened, you paid some money to some art graphic designers and so forth. You bring it to a publisher, and he says great, we take this game, and you can throw your art to the bin because we are retheming your game, or we want our artist to do this again. So that's kind of the pessimistic kind of outcome if you do it too early. So as late.
Yes. So if you are not a publisher, as we are, you don't want to pay for the artist at all.
And speaking of death rows, right? So this game was done completely backwards to what we just said, because the original kind of a creator of the idea for Death Rows is the graphic designer, who is the lead of this game, of the graphics team in this game. So, from the very start, the prototype that I got in March 2020 already looked somewhat like a game that could be published. It was more, rough around the edges, but it already looked very nice, right? Because he wanted to have this, looking good, and being an artist designer, he cannot stand a white card with just scribbles on it. So all the time along the way, we were kind of developing the game, and he was providing more and more assets. And luckily, we didn't have to change that much. For example, the cards that we have in the game have some graphics, right? And they are mostly from the beginning. Some of them were added along the way when we needed more. Okay. But we will be probably after the Kickstarter campaign, before we send the files to the factory, we will probably give time to our artist, Sir Mushroom, to kind of pimp them up, to make them like he would really want to see in the final form, because they look great, but we would like to have more of them, maybe make them more individually kind of fitted to each of the cars, right? But even at this point, this already looks like a final graphic. So that's we are happy to kind of work with a project that is nice to look at from the very beginning, right? Yeah. But don't do that, unless your graphic designer cooperates with you on the game design from the very beginning.
Yes.
So, what's the Death Roads All Stars? What's the idea behind that game? That's a tricky and kind of big question, but I think you'll handle this.
Yeah, I guess we talked about it once or twice before. Yeah. So, as I mentioned some time ago, this is a game that is race-based, card-based, but it's a car fighting game, first and foremost. So we have a track that is I will not pick it out from here, though, make a mess, but you can find it online. You have a track that represents a portion of the road seen from the top, like a drone with a camera was following the cars, and we have those cool miniatures that you have in here, and they kind of move along this track. But kind of in our imagination, the track is stationary, the cards move only in a relationship to each other. So when you speed up, you kind of move away from the cars. If you turn, you kind of move sideways. But you have to add in your imagination on top of that these cars are speeding all the time. They're like going at high speed. And we use these cards that you have here to play actions, and they are language independent for the most part because they have those symbols like turning left or right, going in any direction, they're moving forward, they're taking some statuses, or if you have weapons, then like firing a weapon. The card has a pictogram, kind of what the area of effect or like a line of fire of a given weapon is. So it's easy and kind of intuitive to understand. And your task is to either survive for 5 rounds and be the first in to the front of the board when the game finishes, because that's kind of where the finish line happens, or be the last one standing with a working card that is not dead. And those 5 rounds that I told you about are represented by road events that are picked from a deck of road event cards. And so each game they may be different. And even if they kind of come back after a couple of games, they will be in a different order, so you may never expect what will happen. You have turn simulations there, you have like rough terrain simulation there, you have a train crossing simulation there, all within the like confines of the mechanics of this game, right? But and within the confines of this like static board where when you look at it on the face value, the cars don't really move. But in reality, it's kind of this cinematic experience where they are rushing. If, for example, there's this train crossing, it is like the middle portion of the board becomes where the train will be crossing when it happens. So players must either be in front of it or behind it. And for me, it always kind of reminded me of this scene in Fast and Furious 1, I guess, where they race to kind of go in, like who will be, like, will they make it before the train hits them, or will they have to stop so the train doesn't hit them, right? And it has this feel, even though the cars technically kind of stay and they just move one space forward, one space to the left and all that. But people, when you see people kind of playing this game and engaging in that moment, they're like, oh no, like I have to like brake because the train will crash me, right? So we've simulated the things that happen on the road with clever use of the cars and mechanics. And on top of that, we added cool cars, and you might talk a little bit about how we make them unique each game.
Yeah, and by the way, we had exactly this game between us about the train and trying to reposition your car to not being smashed by the train and so on. Yeah, so speaking of, this game is definitely not for math geeks that just want to count some numbers. This is about action. This is about smashing your friend in the hood or something like this. About throwing them for being hit by the train and so on. You are trying to smash your opponents, your friends through the barriers and something like this, like crazy stuff. To achieve this, we are trying to also make every gear, every vehicle, every weapon, every driver unique in some way, because we want to give you something personal. We want you to have a unique set. Maybe nobody or very limited people around the world will ever play. So we are giving you a lot of options you can pick from. You can pick something suits you best, and you can play this. Maybe in your around your friends, you will never play the same set again. So, for example, if you have this orange car, it's a big. It can push its opponents. It can destroy them, but it's not the fastest one. You cannot turn a lot. You can fire, you can destroy, but if they are too fast for you, you have a trouble. We have the yellow one. It's really fast. It can just outrun everyone. But if you are constantly being hit by others, you are simply destroyed. Or maybe even if they cannot destroy you, they can make you skid. and skid is very, very very dangerous for you because you are not as massive as the orange one. We have the green one. The green one is a very tricky one. So maybe you are not the fastest, maybe you are not the most deadly vehicle on the board, but you are very tricky. You can outsmart your opponents. You can play
Outmaneuver them.
Yes, outmaneuver them. You can play even if they finished already their actions, and you still can do something and push to the limit. We have the blue one. The blue one can turn like crazy. So you can aim, you can dodge, you can everything, and just survive between the bullets. And we have the red one. The red one is a few people personal favorite, because
Me included.
yeah, this car, for example, is not the fastest. It's not.
Oh no, red is not the fastest.
Exactly.
How come?
We break the established norms.
Yeah,
Oh.
but this car is just extremely fun to play because you can push your opponents, not causing much damage, but you are pushing them out of control. So they're just hitting barriers and something like this, and you have a lot of weapons, more than any other car. So you can hit with basically all your turns. You can shoot, and this is extremely fun to play.
And on top of that, as I was showing you before, we have those drivers. Each one of them has a special ability that they can use passively in certain situations, and their own set of 3 basic actions, so that you're not limited to only the cards that you get from your card deck and the weapon cards. You also have those actions that are on the drivers that allow you to do the basic movements every turn. So it's not that I would like to move forward and I'm in a car that is driving on the road, but I don't have a car that moves forward. That would be weird. So that's why we have the drivers with their basic abilities, which are not the greatest, but allow you to kind of reposition before you launch the kind of this devastating attack with your weapons. And the weapons that I mentioned also are picked at the very beginning, and we have 3 slots where we mount the weapons, and these cars kind of are represented in their models. They have the front-mounted weapons like roof or middle-mounted weapons and back-mounted weapons, and each of these weapons is represented by 2 cards. Typically, it's like a less powerful and more powerful version of the attack from this weapon. So each game you pick a car, a driver, and the weapons, and depending on what your friends pick, you might kind of pick a different strategy, because the first person picks the car, and then it goes clockwise, and then the last person picks the driver, and it goes counterclockwise. So you cannot always hope that you get the same set that you always wanted to play, or the one that is the best in your head, right? And that's also kind of a tricky, which one is the best in your head. We've tested that and it doesn't work. You might say, like, okay, he picked this fast car, so I'll take the weapons that shoot mostly forward and do the most damage. And next time he will pick the big car, so I'll pick something that has more distance so I can keep away from him. And like every game is very unique in terms of like what you can do, because your setup is always different.
Yeah, and for the drivers, the most important part is the passive ability for me. So it's something really unique that you can break the rules in some way nobody else can do. So for example, Zoe is one of my favorite because she can shoot or do something spectacular that normally would cost you a lot of handling, a lot of vehicle control, but she's so calm that she can handle it without a problem once around. So this is something unique. This is something that makes your vehicle and driver and weapon set really, really personal and unique.
Yeah, and you mentioned the skid for the second time, so just quickly to explain it, because I think it's also like a very unique and a cool mechanic in this game that many people stress that they like, is that once you lose your mana, the handling that is the points of control of your car, to the point that you have none of it, you will skid. What it means is like your next turn will be just a mandatory action of taking some cards from a skid deck that represent very simple movements like backwards, left, or right. It can be some damage. It can be like a reduction of your gear, which influences how effective your car is. But the fact that you have no control over it and you take, let's say 4 cards like this and you execute them one by one, and sometimes you might hit the barrier and be damaged a lot. Sometimes you may hit another player and damage them a lot with no negative effect for yourself. Or sometimes you can lose your first position and effectively lose the race because it's like the last round. Makes it very exciting to follow and kind of you want to skid because this will allow you to make this epic action, but you are afraid to skid because it might cost you, the win.
And what I like, I think the most of this mechanism is that you can always play the biggest action you have. You have no situation, for example, if you play Magic the Gathering or something like this, you have only 2 mana and you want to play something big for 7 or 6 mana. You cannot. But in Death Roads, you can always play your biggest card even if you have only 1 handling, but your skid will be greater. So you can always do a lot, but it has consequences. Okay. But you can. It's all about this cinematic experience.
Imagine you're on the side of your vehicle and still launching rockets.
Yeah.
And then you go back magically.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So stopping players from doing fun stuff isn't funny. Isn't a good thing. So we decided that we don't want to stop them.
Yeah.
We just want to make them think about if it's worth the effect.
Okay, so you both are playing a lot of board games, I suppose. So I don't know if it's good to ask you, but okay, I'll try it. Is it an easy game for I don't know, some casual players, or maybe it's supposed to be a game for some people who already play board games a lot?
So I would consider it a game, the second step game. That's the name we use in our industry.
Okay.
Something like this. This is not the perfect game for your first game ever, but if you really want to, or if you played some 1 or 2 really simple games before, it is something you can play with no problem. We tested it with some people that are not board gamers, and they did pretty well.
Yeah, we even forced some people to kind of play it with us at one point, and they sat down and didn't know what the game was all about, and we kind of gave them the components. And play with them, okay, so I have these cards in hand, I play that, and we kind of okay, so when you play this, you kind of play this cost, and your card does this, and they're like, oh, okay, so the next card they're like, oh no, I play that, but they was more thought out, even though it was still kind of random. But the 3rd, 4th card, they started kind of grasping the main idea, so it's definitely a casual gamer or a kind of a beginner gaming can get it and can have fun. But yeah, it's the one thing that might kind of scare people off if they have not had any experience with board games is that, you should have the rules explained at the beginning. Right, so when you start listening, and there are some symbols and there are some cards and costs, it can kind of scary. But if anyone has played 2 or 3 games, that this will be kind of old news for them. And most people who play tested this without a lot of experience mentioned the fact that after the first round they didn't need to ask a lot about the rules because they seemed to kind of be self-explanatory.
Yeah, this is also the main difference between a heavy Euro economic game and, for example, Death Roads. And because in a heavy Euro you have to think a lot of ahead. You have to push a little cube, a little wooden cube. Now 1 point up, for example, because 5 rounds later you would need this 1 point for something. And if you didn't, for experienced player, it's obvious that you should, but for you it's not. You cannot learn from this experience that fast. But in Death Roads, you just have a car. Everyone knows how car works, and it's pretty obvious that you are just trying to drive and don't get killed.
And it's equally fun. I would kind of risk a opinion like this, that it's equally fun to just like, oh, I have a car that shoots forward, and I have someone who is forward, so I will shoot them, right? And like not thinking about your strategy at all, because it's just fun to smash other cars and make them, like lose parts. And it's equally fun when everybody is kind of a more knowledgeable about Death Roads, and they have some plan from the beginning, like I will stay back and I will attack, people in front of me, and then I will like overtake them. And there's another person who has a special set of cards that kind of allow them to manipulate others' position and like clash these strategies, right? But even if somebody who is like experienced meets somebody who is like a newbie to this game, the game will still work fine, because there is this like random element that we wanted to have in the game that kind of just equalizes this a little bit more. Because very often it's like, for me personally, after having many rounds of this, it's almost never about the winning, which is a fun kind of a cherry on the top, but it's about this experience in the meantime, like how much cool stuff, how much memorable kind of a moments I can create with the set that I have in my hands.
And if you are a really experienced player, you can push you to the limits. So, for example, you can create a set from your vehicle and a driver and your weapons that is really unusual, that you wouldn't play. That's not your first pick. So, for example, you're trying to achieve a crazy combo from the last position to the first player and something, and you just pick all the elements to achieve that one thing. And maybe that's not the best strategy overall. So maybe the newbie would beat you in the game. But that one strategy, that one moment of genius you achieved is worth it. So
exactly.
Okay, so that's another tricky question here. How long is the tutorial? Because why I'm asking, my wife don't like a lot of reading before really playing. How long does it take to start the game if you are a newbie?
If you open the box, like when it's finally ready, and even with the prototype that we have here, you could do that. If you want to play quickly, you open the box, you take out the stuff, you take the rule book, read the first
few pages.
First few pages. Well, actually, there's one page, but it's not the first one. That's why I stopped. Like the second or the third page, where it shows you the setup of the board and all the elements, and then you go to the back of the rule book where you have a ready-made sets. So a driver and a car and the weapons. You find those in your components, and you're ready to play. It's like, I would say maybe 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
When you want to explain all the rules.
It's like 15.
Yeah, then it's like 15 if somebody is also like setting up the board, right? But like we try to keep it to a minimum. And also, if you want, if it's not a problem for your friends that you play with, if you start with like playing the game without really explaining much, and play 1 round or 1.5 rounds, the rules will be explained even better, and then you can restart or continue if nothing terrible happened, because sometimes you're like, okay, so I shouldn't be last. Okay, that's new. But really, like, you can start playing with explaining the let's say 25% of the rules. And the rest will kind of, they will catch up as they play the cards, as you play the cards, because, as I said, we try to make them self-explanatory, language independent, and kind of, for sure, you will not have to go back to the rule book to check some table that, like, okay, if I'm at speed this, and I'm at this part of the track, there's like a matrix of results.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nothing like this. Everything you need to know once you know the basic rules is on the components on the table, right? Like
Yes.
either your cards in your hand or your road events in front of the board, and that's it, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's like 50 minutes tops, I would say.
Cool, very, very cool. Right, last, maybe a big question. What doesn't people know about creating board games? What's the, I don't know, maybe there's something you would like to share and that's not a common knowledge.
Okay, so I'm gonna warn everyone, everyone about creating board games and games in general, and because of this is a creative process, and this is something you need a lot of time to make it work, because it's a system, it's a set of rules and something like this. You have to put a lot of effort, a lot of your heart, a lot of everything, of your sweat, of your work into the game, into the box. This is something you would consider personal. And this is something that other players would play, would vote, would give you a score for your game and something like this. And there are a lot of players, so a lot of them wouldn't like your game. Just simple like that. And this is for the finished product, so you have to be ready. But during the development, during the design of a game, your game is probably terrible. Like for the most of the time your game is terrible. Maybe at some point it will be better, maybe it will be good, but it's just about finishing the project. So when you are a game designer or game developer, you are working with something that doesn't work, it's not fun, and when it starts to be fun, you have fun playing it and so on, testing it. You have to switch to another project because this one is ready. So we are always working with something just a crap.
Yeah.
So be ready.
Typically, the kind of the phases of that is like you come up with the greatest game ever, and then you have it in your head and everything works perfectly. Then you make the first prototype and it's crap. It doesn't work at all. And then you iterate for a long time, and you're like embarrassed to show it to anyone, so you just play with yourself, playing 3 or 4 players at the same time. At some point, you reach a level when you are not too embarrassed to show this game to people who love you, who will not kind of devastate your psyche, and you show it to them, and they're nice. They kind of will tell you some things that they will not kind of be too harsh, but they will point out some obvious things that you have somehow missed, and then you can kind of expand the circle of people you can show it to. So your friends who kind of like you, so they will also not bring you to the ground, and they will show you another set of things that don't work, and then you kind of like keep expanding this. At some point, you'll be able to show it to a random person without this kind of impending heart attack. And there's also another thing that like game designers have to learn, is that there's a phrase that sounds horrible and kind of gruesome, but it's used metaphorically. So you have to learn to kill your babies. And to go even more gruesome, like to sometimes cut off some parts of them. And by babies, of course, I mean the game project, and by limbs and the parts of it, I mean the mechanics, the elements, some factions in the game, some kind of sets of cards, because they are all so cool. They fit so thematically to this game, and then somebody sits down and is like, do I need to use that? Like, can we play without it? And you're like, yes, but it's thematically okay. And you learn that, okay, this part has to go. And because like we said in the earlier, like games are fun generators. Anything that doesn't give you fun has to go, even though it hurts like hell when you are the creator of that element.
Nobody cares about you.
Exactly, right? That's kind of you have to develop a thick skin and just be able to murder those metaphorical babies. in bulk, basically.
And there's another one. If you want to be rich, don't be a game designer for board games.
Yes.
Okay,
Period.
so with this bright idea,
Happy note.
happy note, we stop here. And what can I say? Thank you guys for coming today. Thank you all for watching, for listening, and just buy Death Roads.
15th of July 2021, that's when the Kickstarter starts. Be there, support us, and then have fun.
Yeah.
And see our other episodes of Knightcast, of course. See you.
Thank you.
See ya. Thank you.
Hiya.
Bye.